Hi everyone, good evening. Tonight we're going to watch our first video on ecology. Ecology in general is a field that is very, very term heavy. There's a lot of words and definitions. So as you watch, please pause and write down the definitions for the terms that I asked you to define. So what are we talking about when we speak about ecology? Ecology is the branch of science that's concerned with the interrelationship of organisms and their environments. Meaning, when we study biology, we study a living thing. We don't necessarily study how that living thing affects its environment or how it is affected by its environment. In ecology, though, we'll look at a bacteria and we'll say, how does this bacteria affect its environment? Does it infect other things? How do the resources in the environment affect the bacteria? So we study how organisms interact with each other and with their environment. When we talk about ecology and organisms in an ecosystem, we can organize the life in an ecosystem as well as the non-living parts of an ecosystem in the following way. The most basic part of an ecosystem is an individual, one living thing. Individuals are then organized into populations. So in this diagram, we go from one deer to a group of deer. A population would be members of the same species who are able to reproduce with each other. The next level of organization is a community. A community, we see here, we have our deer, we also have a mountain lion, we have trees, we have owls, we have, I think, monkeys. So a community would be all of the living things in a specific environment. Then we have an ecosystem. When we go to an ecosystem, not only are we including living things, we're also including non-living things. So the ecosystem would be the interaction of living and non-living things in a specific environment. Then ecosystems of the world can be divided up into biomes. Now, you guys may have done biome projects in 4th grade about the tundra and the desert and the grasslands. And basically, a biome is a part of Earth with specific climate. And because of that climate, there are specific plants and animals as well as non-living things in that area. For example, a rainforest will have a lot of rain. It's going to have a really wide variety of birds, snakes, leopards, whereas a desert, which has a totally different climate, will not have those things. It will have the sand and the cactus and all the other things that we know exist in the desert. And then when we put all of the biomes of the Earth together, we have the biosphere, which is just Earth. So going back to an ecosystem, we said an ecosystem consists of living and non-living things. And in an ecosystem, biotic and abiotic factors interact with each other. On this diagram, we could see what biotic and abiotic factors are. Biotic factors are living things. So in this case, we have some, it looks like jellyfish. We have some plants, a polar bear, a whale. These are all living things. They interact with each other, like we see this whale eating some plants. They also interact with the non-living environment around them, with things like sun, rocks, and water. So when we think about living and non-living parts of the environment, we want to call them abiotic and biotic, and here are some abiotic and biotic factors. In terms of the non-living parts of an ecosystem, things like sun, sand, soil, rain, and rocks, as well as climate, will all affect the types of plants, animals, and fungus that can live in an area. So you want to be thinking, how do these factors interact with each other? Now, on this slide, when I spoke about biotic factors, I was pretty general. There's plants, there's animals, there's fungus. We can obviously organize those terms more specifically. When we talk about plants and animals, there's first category, 3 main types. Producers, they produce things. In this case, they make their own food. These are our autotrophs, they're our plants. Then we have consumers. Consumers are heterotrophs, which means that they take in food from others. That would be things like me and you and all the other animals and insects that we could think of. And then there's decomposers. So decomposers would be things like bacteria and fungus. And they don't eat the way we eat. Rather, they'll break down dead or dying organisms and then add the nutrients from those dead and dying organisms back to the environment. So if you were talking about a food chain or what animal eats what, you would say producers are plants. They get the energy from the sun. Then they're eaten by consumers, and then they're broken down after they die by decomposers. Another type of, or one specific type of consumer in an ecosystem is a scavenger. A scavenger is something like a vulture or a hyena, and that kind of organism feeds on organisms killed by others. So a decomposer is a bacteria. It breaks down dead organisms. A scavenger is more a regular animal, just it doesn't kill the animals on its own. It eats animals that were killed by others. So if we go back here, we could see, okay, the producers are the green plants, and then the consumers are the animals that are eating either the green plants or they're eating each other. And decomposers would come and break down the dead and dying plants and animals in this ecosystem and probably return their nutrients back to the soil. Now, in an ecosystem, the types of biotic and abiotic factors will determine how big a population in a given ecosystem can become. So in one of the classes, we spoke about the idea that you can't just have a billion birds living in a forest, because chances are there would not be enough food, space, water, and other resources for those birds. So we say that the population size in any given ecosystem is determined and limited by the amount of available resources in that ecosystem. So an ecosystem can only support a certain amount of organisms, and that will depend on how many resources that ecosystem has. A more relatable idea could be if we think about our bodies and the fact that we have two hands, and then we think about how many basketballs could we hold. Chances are most of us could only hold one or two basketballs. Why is that? We only have two hands and we're limited. So too, a forest with 100 trees could maybe hold 80 birds, but if a forest had 200 trees, that forest might be able to support 160 birds. Things that limit carrying capacity or that limit population size are diseases, natural factors, meaning natural disasters, fires, floods, amounts of available food, whether there are predators, and just in general, the amount of resources available. So limiting factors are resources that limit the population size in a community. And when we talk about limiting factors and carrying capacity, we usually draw the following graph. And what this graph tells us is that every environment has a carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is the maximum population size of a species that an environment can support. So in this case, we're talking about paramecium, and we're looking at a certain number of days. So we see as time goes on, the population of paramecium increases until it reaches 200 paramecium. And then we have a straight line, which means past this point, the population can't get bigger. There's not enough food and space for the paramecium. So instead, we have a straight line, which indicates to us that the number of paramecium stays the same. What we're saying is that population size increases until carrying capacity is reached. So what we did today was just really go through some of the background of important terms for ecology, and we're going to use those terms now to talk about feeding relationships and how energy is transferred in an ecosystem.